Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Epic Realms. Today, our guest is none other than the co-creator of Pathfinder, Starfinder. He was the executive editor of the Pathfinder Tales, along with many other things. And his name, James Sutter. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
So, quick question for you. Where did you started in with Paizo fairly early in your life?
Yeah.
Were you a gamer first? Were you a writer first? Where did you
I
kind of
mean,
start
can you
off in
even
your life?
separate those two? All of the above. But no, I started playing role-playing games in fifth grade. My fifth grade teacher taught some of us how to play Dungeons and Dragons first edition, like on our lunch breaks. So I owe Mr. Tivnan my career. But it was this great situation where he taught us how to play, and we played a campaign with him over lunches for like, it felt like forever. It was probably a couple of weeks. But then he was like, all right, now you've seen a role-playing game, go make your own role-playing games. And so we spent the rest of the school year designing our own role-playing games now that we had the concept. So I was really lucky because even from the very beginning, my introduction to role-playing games was that it was this creative medium and that you could do whatever you wanted and make your own. And I'd always wanted to be a writer. I can remember as soon as I could read, I wanted to write. Before I had a computer, I had a typewriter and would sit there, banging out little starts to novels. But so, I played role-playing games all up through high school and whatnot, and then moved away to college. And when I lost my group, obviously moving away to college, I got really into music and was kind of doing other stuff and hadn't really thought about, I mean, who thinks of role-playing games as a career move, right? It didn't seem, it never occurred to me that somebody made these things for a
Yeah.
living. So I went into journalism instead. So when I was in college, I started writing for the college newspaper and doing a lot of, music journalism and just gonzo stuff where I would go have adventures and write about it. And then I got out of college and realized that if you want to be in journalism, nobody actually wants to pay you to have gonzo adventures. And so I started working for some local, small town newspapers and was thinking, oh, I'm not sure that I want to be doing this. And then I discovered that Dungeon and Dragon magazines, as well as Amazing Stories, were all based out of, I live in Seattle, so it was just one of the suburbs here. And I went, oh, that sounds amazing. So I saw they were hiring for an editor-in-chief for Amazing Stories. So I sent in an email, and I've just graduated college. I'm 20 years old at this time. I can't even drink yet.
Right.
And I sent an email to the CEO of the company saying, hey, I see you're hiring an editor-in-chief. I am totally unqualified, but here's what I can do. And,
Right.
Fortunately I'd been doing journalism, I was all in on journalism for a couple of years. So I had a nice portfolio of, 100 articles I'd written, something like that. And so fortunately, Lisa Stevens, the owner of Paizo, said, we don't have any editorial positions, but why don't you come in and, do an interview and we'll just see what we got. And apparently she liked my chutzpah because she gave me a job, and the only job they had was finding images for their web store of products at a nickel a JPEG. So I literally was just a human Google going through and collating images. But
So are you getting stuff that was like made by other people, or were you finding stuff from within their own resources for
no.
images?
So what they had just started running the Paizo web store, which carried, Paizo stuff, but also all these other games. So they had these huge lists of games from their distributor that they could
Okay.
sell, but they didn't have images. It was just spreadsheets. And so my job was to go through and for, every ISBN or, whatever, find a picture of that game somewhere
Okay.
on the company's website and just put those in a folder and give them to Paizo. So really like the most menial labor you
Right.
could possibly have. Uh, but it got me in the door, and then from there I became the intern for the magazines. And then from the internship, I became the customer service rep, the only customer service rep back in that day. So if you called about your subscription to the magazines between, in that year that I was doing that, you got me. Um, and then eventually, but at the same time, I was also still, I was still writing, I was still doing journalism, I was still trying to get started with fiction, and having a little bit of success there. And so finally, I was able to just kind of say, to Lisa and Eric and everybody who was in charge, like, look, I need to be an editor. That's what I'm trying to do. I could go do it at this, the small town newspaper over here, which I don't want to do, or I could do it here. And fortunately, they went ahead and created an assistant editor position for me on Dungeon Magazine, and that was how I got started working on RPGs. And then that turned into, from Dungeon, we created Pathfinder, and then I was, eventually running the Pathfinder Tales line, helped create that. And then, of course, I got to be the creative director on Starfinder, which was great. So yeah, I was at Paizo for 13 years before I finally left a couple years ago to write full time.
Okay. Well, when you were growing up, how was your family with gaming? Because some families are like, that gaming stuff isn't the place to go, or were they
Oh,
supportive?
my family was totally cool with it. Like I'm sure they didn't understand it at
Yeah,
all,
yeah.
but my my family was always very supportive of all my different creative endeavors, even if they didn't get it. I had a pop punk band in high school, and I'm sure that both my parents probably have permanent hearing loss from us practicing. But they were always very supportive, even when I look back and I cringe at the sort of songs we were writing and the fact that my parents had to listen to them. But they were always very happy that I was doing something I was passionate about.
That's great. That's really fun. There's so many people there. I hear so many horror stories of people that have families that aren't, and every time I hear someone that's like, no, they're super supportive, and that always warms my heart. That's always great to hear. But it's always nice to know, because people sometimes don't realize, that things aren't always easy for everyone.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had one of my early bandmates was also somebody that I gamed with, and his parents were very religious. And one day he came home and they had thrown all of his, D&D books and Shadowrun books in the fireplace, and that was just gone.
Yeah, yep, yep. It's a bummer to hear, but what can you do? I mean, you can't,
Yeah,
when you're a kid, you just have to say that sucks and move on. And hopefully he got, more, hopefully he got more books again later down
yeah.
the road.
Yeah, no, I'm really cognizant of how lucky I got, starting there, but at every point in my career, I've had a lot of really lucky breaks along the way, which is probably true of most people who have careers in gaming or writing.
Right,
Like, it takes a solid chunk of luck along with everything else.
right. So you were there kind of when, and I don't mean to make it sound like it, because some people hear the word third party gaming as like a negative, but it's not to me. I think third party gaming
Oh,
content
sure.
creators are amazing. Um, and so there was a point where Paizo was kind of mostly third party stuff for, 3.5 before
Yeah.
they started doing Pathfinder. So you were there at that when it
Oh
changed
yeah,
over.
I'd been on the magazines for a couple of years through Paizo losing the magazine license.
Hmm.
So we had been doing the magazines, then those went away, and we went, oh God, like, what are we gonna do now? So we started making supplements that were for Dungeons and Dragons through the Open Gaming
Hmm.
license. And then I was there when the Open Gaming license, it didn't go away, but it changed in such a way for fourth edition that there was some stuff about the contracts that made it
Right.
really not a good business strategy.
Yeah.
Whether you loved fourth edition or hated it, like, my understanding is that the contracts made it not super viable
Yeah.
as a business model. And so we decided to make Pathfinder instead, because we could still do that based on the 3.5 open gaming
Right.
license. And so we made Pathfinder as kind of 3.75, as
Yep.
everybody
Yeah.
called it at the time, and it took off. And
Yeah.
that gave us the ability to then roll forward with, we'd already for maybe a year or so been creating our own adventure paths, our own setting. We'd already begun creating sort of the world of Pathfinder, but then we finally had the rules set also so that we could kind of own
Right.
the whole thing. And yeah, it took off and kind of never looked back.
Right. Well, and for those that are listening, the great thing for people that are older, there are people that don't like change, and
Mm-hmm.
the shift from the shift for fourth edition was very much like the shift from second edition to third edition, and it was just like, do we want to get rid of all of these rules that we know and start over? But Pathfinder's like, no, you don't. They're
Right.
pretty much the same. And so it was really easy to adopt and be like, well, there's still all this great content for the system that I know.
Well, and of course, the grand irony and the circle of life in the game industry, of course, is that now Pathfinder's in its second edition, right?
Right.
Like, of for a certain style of game, the edition cycle is inevitable because you just without it, you sort of run out of books to publish. And so you kind of have two business models in RPGs. One is sort of you do a couple of books for a game and that's all you ever do. And the other one is you put out a ton of books, but that can become unwieldy and you end up having to sort of reboot and revise with these edition changes
Right.
every X number of years.
Right.
And there's pluses and minuses to both sides, but especially as a business, if you start putting out a lot of books and you've got a staff to make all those books, you kind of gotta keep doing it, right? Or you have to go like the Monte Cook Games route where you're just always doing new games, which is perfectly valid, and they produce amazing stuff. But it's a different business model.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, for sure. You were quite a bit when Pathfinder came out on kind of helping build the world and build the system. I mean, didn't
Yeah.
you did quite a bit? Like, didn't like you started with a gazetteer, if I'm not mistaken, and started working on maps and like flushing out the
Oh,
stuff
well,
for
I mean,
that?
we were all
I mean, there was
there was
obviously it's
only
a team effort, but
yeah, there was only a handful of us though on the sort of editorial development design side. There were half a dozen of us.
okay.
Maybe as many as 10 if you're bringing in all the art department and sort of the executives. But it was all hands on deck. Everybody was doing stuff. I was always more interested in the setting side than the rules side.
Yeah.
I can do crunch, but I dramatically prefer
The story.
the story, the world, the cultures, the monsters. So I was right in the thick of it with everybody, as we were, we had, these big maps that were mostly blank and we had to fill them in, and so I loved my favorite articles ever were sort of those early gazetteers where we didn't know hardly anything about anything, right?
Right.
So, like for instance, in the third volume of Pathfinder Adventure Path, Varicia was kind of the heart of the setting in those early days. And that was something where the map of Varicia was from James Jacobs, who had this map and he had a couple of locations, but that was kind of all he had. So he handed that to me and said, okay, write a gazetteer and put in another 30 locations. And so I basically just got to build everything in Varicia that wasn't one of his, tentpole things.
Yeah.
I just got to fill it up with craziness. And then after I turned it in, he and Wes Schneider sat me down because it was really in the early days of the setting. We didn't know a lot of what the world was kind of going to be. So they sat me down and they were like, look, this is great, but you're going to have to slow your roll on stuff. Cause like, I think I had like a space elevator in there. It was pretty gonzo, but yeah, like I got to do that. I got to do a lot of the development of, Kyonin, the Elven Nation, or the Orc Nation of Belkson. I got to just have these wide swaths of the world to just play with. And that's always been my favorite, and that continued, throughout the game's life. Like later on, I got to basically design the whole the first world, like the fairy realm, or one that was a pet project of mine that turned out to be more auspicious than I had expected was I did a book called Distant Worlds, which was Pathfinder's solar system. So Pathfinder had focused almost entirely on this one planet called Galarian. And being a huge sci-fi nerd, I was like, well, what about the other planets in this solar system? And so, the rest of the staff were like, sure, go run with it. And
Not that that wasn't
so,
a precursor to something else later down the
well,
road.
that's the thing. So I got to like design this whole solar system, and people got really excited about it. And then a few years later, when we decided we wanted to do Starfinder, that was sort of the foundation of the setting. Like that Pathfinder solar system from that book became the basis that we used to develop the Pact worlds for Starfinder. And so I feel like my whole career has been these great chances to like take something that started as a small project, and then if people get excited about it, like exploded into something much larger.
Yeah.
You know, is like the city of Karamaga was another one where like it started as a little throwaway section in the back of an adventure, and now it has source books and a novel and comics and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. When you're going through and you're building, say you're putting together a book, say you're doing like the NPC codex or something like that, and you look in the cover and you see like the list of the credits of the people that worked on the book. How do you guys split up who works on what? Like, is it like here's a chapter, or here's like an underlying story, or things like that? How do you guys separate who's working on what in one of those books?
Well, it depends on the book. One thing people might not realize is that actually the writing for something like a book at Paizo, and I think Wizards does a lot of this too, but a bunch of game companies, the books are usually written freelance. So somebody in-house will create an outline of exactly what they want in the book. They're the whoever the head developer is. And then they'll go to a bunch of freelancers and say, hey, would you like to write part of this book? And then they'll parcel out like, okay, you do this chapter, you do this chapter, and maybe you have somebody who's really good at monsters, so you have them do the monster section, but you've got somebody else who's really good at rules design, so you get them to do rules. And so usually books were sort of divvied up that way, just in terms of who was available and who specialized in different things. But my favorites were always the ones where I would get permission to just do a book myself, and say, hey, if you give me this, let me do a source book on the first world, and I'll just do the whole thing. I'll do all, every part of it, and then I'll just turn it in and it'll be done. And as much as I love working on a team, there's something really fun to be able to take a subject you're passionate about and just cover it all yourself too.
Yeah.
But it's a push and pull, because also so many times the best stuff comes out of those meetings of the minds, and working at Paizo or at Wizards or anywhere, some of my colleagues are like the most creative people I've ever worked with, right? Like I love, I don't want to work on something about hell if Wes Schneider isn't involved, right? Because he's so good at that stuff. So, and that's true of kind of everybody.
When somebody has, say you're coming up with something for First Worlds, and then somebody else 3 years later is like, oh, I want to write this little addendum, do they like come to you? Do you guys like, how do you guys make sure that everything stays kind of cohesive? Like obviously there's always going to be crossover where there's contradiction, and then you got to fill in those gaps, but
well, I mean, it depends. It depends who you are, right? Like when I was the creative director on Starfinder, I got to help make all the decisions about stuff. Now I'm nobody. I'm a freelancer. So, when I accept an assignment for something at Paizo, even though I was there for so many years, even if I'm writing about something that I built in the first place, like it's not mine anymore. It belongs to someone else. So I have to do whatever they say I should be doing. But I think that for the most part, what people try to do, unless they're actively retconning something, I think folks try to really look at the canon of what's been published. Something that a maxim I always lived by is no head canon. If it hasn't been published or at least written down internally and circulated, it doesn't exist, because otherwise you end up in all these places where somebody publishes something and you go, why did you say that the Orc King, had a red hat when he's supposed to have a blue hat? And they say, well, you didn't write that anywhere.
right.
And like, you can really end up shooting yourself in the foot if you don't, if you let your imagination trump what is actually in the books.
Yeah.
So, to keep track of canon and stuff, at times there was people actively where that was their main job, just tracking all the canon. but also oftentimes it's the fan base. Like the Pathfinder wiki was invaluable from when it was initially created, and it was fans who were updating it, and all of us in-house were using it to search for, oh god, what did we say about Rahadum? I don't remember. And then we go look through there and see like,
Yeah, can you hold on one moment? I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to edit this for some reason. And thank you for the people gifting subs in our stream. But for some reason the audio is coming through. And I appreciate the gift subs, everyone. But I'm not sure. I usually have the audio shut off for that, and I don't know how it's coming through.
Interesting. I don't hear anything.
Yeah, it's just coming through on mine. Are the people watching it hearing the audio as well? I'm pretty sure they are. Well, that's going to be a fun edit for me. Yep, they say that they are hearing it. Yeah, I don't have the video pop up, but I do have the audio. That is okay, Camber. I understand. Hopefully James can forgive us.
It is what it is in this day of multi-platform broadcasting.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I have it. It's not even as there's not even a source for it, so I don't even know where the audio is coming through.
Can you just kill the audio for the broadcast? Well,
no, because it would kill your audio.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's literally, I don't like, there's supposed to be an audio for all of that stuff in Twitch, but I have it all shut off. Actually, it's not even here. It's not even there for me to delete, so I don't even know. I don't know where the audio is coming from.
Well, then everybody in chat will just have to silently appreciate you.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of gosh, yeah, it's not there. It's not there. That is so ridiculous. Yeah. Well, it is over now. So we will, hopefully it won't, yeah, I don't have stream elements. Nope, it's not that. I will have to research this afterwards because that's never happened before. Usually it won't even pop up, but the audio, and only the audio, the video isn't coming through that goes with it. And that is under the same thing. So strange. All right. But so
moving right
along. So Mike, I have a question for you, and this kind of will lead into something else down the road. How much did you work on the Planar Adventures book? Because go ahead.
I worked a little bit on Planar Adventures, but not a whole ton, because I believe that was right when Starfinder was happening as well, or the early days of that. So I couldn't bite off nearly as much as I wanted to out of that one. But I definitely remember working on it. I can't remember if I wrote Heaven or if I just gave a bunch of design notes for Heaven. I think I might have written it. One thing that's weird about this, after so many years in the industry, there's a lot of stuff where I literally don't remember what I've written. I'll look at a book and see my name in it and go, God, what did I do? Or I'll go through my old files and find like I was just looking the other day for something and came across a bunch of monsters I'd written for the first Pathfinder bestiary, and I had no memory of any of them. It was stuff like, oh, I guess I wrote the cockatrice. Okay, cool. So I don't remember which planes I wrote for Planar Adventures versus talked about, but I know I did something for it.
The reason that I asked that is because you came up with 2 Pathfinder novels.
Yes.
And when pretty much anybody I've talked to that's read it goes, there isn't a book out there, a role-playing type novel out there that deals with the planes in such a way where it's so complex, but it's explained so easily, and it makes it so fun to go on the ride along. I thought to myself, how the hell did you balance the all of that and still tell a really great cohesive story when you got somebody that's jumping the planes?
And that was the fun of it,
right?
Like, that was originally when I first got the nod to write to pitch a Pathfinder novel to Eric Mona, the publisher, because I was running the line at the time. Actually, the way it happened is So I was running the Pathfinder Novels line, and as a result, I figured I can never write a Pathfinder novel because that would be like, self-dealing basically. If I'm going to get a novel contract, I want to earn it. I was
Right.
very idealistic at that point. Um, and so one day I was printing off some short stories of my own on the office printer, which I shouldn't have been doing. And Eric, I walked into the copy room and found Eric was sitting there looking at one. And I went, oh God, but my name wasn't on it. And so he said, like, oh, yeah, you should get whoever wrote this to write a Pathfinder book. Like, this is really good. And I was like, well, that was mine. And he goes, oh, well, then you should write one. And I was like, well, but that wouldn't really be kosher because I'm running it. And he's like, I'm your boss. If I tell you to write one, write a
Right
novel.
one.
And I went, yes,
Nice.
sir. But
Nice.
so then I suddenly I'm going to pitch this novel, and really figuring out what I wanted to write about was just me taking all of my toys, or like all of the toys from Pathfinder that I loved the most, and saying, how can I use all these? Right. Because I loved the concept of atheism in a fantasy world, and
Right.
like the nation Rahadum, which is sort of Pathfinder's atheist nation. So I wanted to play with that, but I also really wanted to do, a Planescape book. I wanted to do Outer Planes stuff. And so like cramming all of that together was how I came up with this character, Salim, who's, basically a Blade Runner style atheist detective, like, a priest hunter who makes some bad decisions and ends up working for the death goddess, tracking down souls that have gone missing in the afterlife. And so once I figured that out, I went, oh, okay, now I can go to all those places I wanted to go. And it was really fun, especially because some of those places just didn't have that much information yet. And so there was, sometimes I would have a great resource, like in the second book, minor spoilers.
If they
So the
haven't
books
read it
are
yet, they should.
Death's Heretic and The Redemption Engine are the two novels, but in The Redemption Engine, they go to both heaven and hell. And so for hell, I had the source book that Wes Schneider had written. And so that was really easy because I just read through his book and, literally highlighted things where it's like, oh my God, I gotta hit that. I gotta hit that. And then tried to figure out how to incorporate them into the story. But for heaven, there wasn't a lot of stuff. And so I got to make up a bunch more stuff, which then later, after first appearing in the novel, later came into the game world through the various source books. And that was something I always really loved with the novel line, was that interplay of letting the game world inform the fiction, but also the fiction inform the game world. And that was it was a balance that I think in the early days made people kind of nervous, because I remember a lot of conversations about how various fiction lines not to be named had, quote unquote, ruined the campaign settings that they went along with,
Right.
uh, because they, blew stuff up or wanted to make these big changes that the game side people didn't want.
Right.
But I think the fact that I had been so involved with the development of the game world, and I still was, even as I was running the novel line, I was still a developer, working on all the setting books. And because I'd been there with James Jacobs and Eric and, Jason Bowman and everybody building stuff, they trusted that I wasn't going to, shatter all the toys.
Right.
And so it worked out really nicely, I think.
Yeah. It was, like I said, out of all of the novels, and I've gone through all of them, I do them on audiobook, so the narrator for your books was also amazing. You really got the
Oh,
feel.
yeah.
You really got the feel for the characters. I don't want to say ethnicity, but he kind of took like almost like I don't want to say he took kind of an accent
Yeah.
that really fit in my mind what a Rahadun person would sound like.
Yeah.
And so it was, actually all of the narrators for all of the Pathfinder tales. And maybe you're the guy to ask, how do you go about when when Audible comes forward? Is that on your end, or is that from the book publishers company?
So I did get to work. Did get to be the point person working on that Audible arrangement, which was really nice. The whole thing came out of an interview. I was doing an interview with, I think, the Publishers Weekly podcast, talking about tie-in fiction. And then later I got an email from somebody at Audible saying, hey, we just heard you on this podcast. we think maybe you should have an audio deal for the Pathfinder novels. And went, oh, okay. And so we worked out a contract, and they published all of the Pathfinder Tales novels in audio format. And they made them, actually. So they went and found all the narrators and everything. And
Okay.
I worked closely with them, trying to get them all the pronunciations and everything, and we got approval over everything as the license holder. But yeah, they saw what we were doing and said, we think that could be really big. And it worked out great. Like, people really loved those books.
Yeah, they were. I loved them. I mean, that's
Well,
just
thank you.
me. And like I said, we got a couple people that are probably in chat or whatnot that have read all of the books, all of the Pathfinder Tales cover to cover. When you're going through and you're picking uh, writers to pen a book, and I know we've had a couple people on. We've had Chris Jackson on here, and we've had
Oh,
Green
Chris is
One on
great.
here.
Yeah.
And I've talked with Dave Gross on another
Mm-hmm.
podcast that I worked with some time ago, and they, everybody kind of has a little bit different story at how they got in. How did you have a process for finding and vetting writers? Did you just get, hey,
Yeah.
this guy's a writer, he's really awesome, we'll bring him in, or was it different for everyone?
I mean, I was very as so I was very lucky in that Eric, the publisher, when we decided that we were going to do this, he basically just said, go, you're in charge. And I had been very lucky from the beginning at Paizo. I had gotten sort of tapped as the fiction guy all the way back in when we first launched Pathfinder Adventure Path. We had this section in the back called the Pathfinder's Journal, which was like serialized fiction. Um, and I got put in charge of that because I was the only person at the time who had ever published fiction, and not very much. I'd sold like a short story or two,
Yeah.
maybe three. But we were all very young, and so they were like, well, you got three stories. And I wrote the third Pathfinder journal, and Jacobs and Wes, who were kind of running Pathfinder Adventure Path at the time, said, you know what? Okay, you're in charge. The fiction is yours. Go. And then people really liked that. So when we did the novel line, Eric just gave me carte blanche to go out and find folks, basically. And I really tried. I felt very strongly that tie-in fiction sometimes gets a bad rap. People see a logo on the top of the book and they think that, oh, well, that must be, garbage. Even though so many of us came to fantasy and science fiction through Star Wars and Forgotten Realms and all of those, licensed books. And so I had a real passion early on for making sure that we would be top-notch tie-in fiction. Like, I wanted to only publish tie-in fiction that was as good as any creator-owned book. And so I was super choosy. And so it was this mix of, there was the pool of people who were established tie-in authors, folks like, Dave Gross and Elaine Cunningham, and who'd been around and done that for many years in the gaming industry. But then there were a lot of folks. I started going to conventions that focused more on science fiction and fantasy publishing, just to meet folks, because I knew there are a bunch of great authors out there who are gamers, right? They're playing the stuff. So like, perhaps we could get some people that way. And that was how I started to meet folks like, like Leanne Merciel or Tim Pratt or, basically everybody in there who hadn't written tie-in before was somebody who at some point I had talked to them and they had said, I'm a big role-playing games fan. And I had said, well, perhaps you would like to write in this world, right? And, we started getting, big names. I mean, we had Sam Sykes write a book when he was just starting to blow up. So it was really fun to be able to go find authors who had gotten established doing their own thing and then bring them into our world. And I also tried really hard to make it a good experience for them, because sometimes, one of the reasons, and this is a dirty secret in the industry, but one of the reasons why a lot of tie-in fiction isn't very good is that it's written under abysmal conditions. I know people who have written for huge properties, and they'll tell me the story of like, oh yeah, and then I had 1 month to write that novel or
Yeah.
something, right? Or 2 months. And I always thought, like, how could you possibly expect quality work under those conditions? So I
Yeah.
would, find somebody and I would give them the time they need. If it takes a year for you to write the novel, great, we'll schedule you a year, and I would work hand in hand with them to make sure that, it wasn't just me handing them a 6 foot tall stack of rule books and saying,
Right.
get it right. I was always there to help figure out where in the world would be right for them. Like, what are you interested in? Okay, let's put you in this corner of the world, and like, here's how this magic system works, etc. And really just tried to make it as painless a process as possible. And I think as a result, we got some really incredible books.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Dave Gross, and he wrote Prince of Wolves, which was our first novel. Uh, and I feel like that really set the bar. He wrote this sort of fantasy Sherlock Holmes
Right.
thing, and
Or
I
buddy cop Sherlock Holmes. Yeah.
yeah, and it was just so good that that really made me say, okay, this can work. We can
Right.
have some really incredible novels.
So speaking of that, you mentioned you didn't want to just set down rule books in front of people and be like, this is this. But it still seemed like a lot of those books definitely followed rules. And I know
Oh, they have to.
and I know some people said, yeah, that like I did that because that's what I wanted to do. But then there have been other times I've heard where, obviously like there's the whole idea that I've seen on the Pathfinder Paizo forums of like, well, what class and level do you think that XYZ character is? And
Hmm.
some of them you can look at them and go like, okay, this is exactly what they are. You can almost point out their levels and what feats they took. But then there's others, such as in Dave Gross's book, where it's like, well, maybe you can't do that, but it still makes sense. Obviously, I'm not saying anything.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's the thing, we always said you don't want to hear the dice rolling, but you also have to know, like, it
mhm,
has to be consistent because, people would often say, like, well, why do I have to, can't we bend this rule? Especially around magic. I feel like magic is where it shows up most obviously because, if somebody just punches somebody in a bar in your book, it can be hard to tell if that person's a fighter or a barbarian or
right,
what. But if they cast a fireball, you know what level they are, at
right,
least at minimum.
right,
Um, and so people would sometimes be like, oh, why do I have to do this? And the answer is that these are the natural laws of the world. It's not a rule because it's in a game book. Like, the rules in the game books are attempting to simulate the reality of this setting that we've got. And so both the novels and the rules are trying to describe the same thing.
right.
And that was always really important to me. And it bit me in the ass too. Like, I had to write I had to rewrite an entire scene, an entire chapter of the redemption engine at fairly late in the process because I think I can't remember what it was, but it was something like, I had someone casting hold person on an angel, and it only works on humanoids and
Yeah,
angels are
yeah,
outsiders,
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing. And I absolutely felt that that drive to just bend the rules, but you can't. You got to find creative workarounds, and I think that people really appreciated that about that line.
I agree. I agree. There have been, and D&D has a lot of books out there, and a
Mhm.
lot of them don't necessarily follow that kind of guideline. But I think it's fun, and I've heard from people that I've talked to, or just I've been to conventions and have lots of friends that all say the same thing. Like, it's really cool that we can look at it and go, okay, uh, uh, well, I can't remember his name. The alchemist, the Tim Pratt's book. Like, he did this, and he has this
Oh yeah,
infusions,
yeah,
and
exactly.
he has this and this, and it's really cool to see how creative the writer can be. Given this set of rules, and still make it really fun. Or like I
Yeah.
said, like Chris Jackson's stuff with his. Like, we joke a lot when we get to the second book. Like, we had no idea that what's her name was a sorcerer, and that cat was her familiar in the Chris
Right,
Jackson
right.
book, and that's just amazing. And so that,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I loved, it was really nice getting those people who were, they were really good authors, but then also they were gamers. And so they would, I'd get the book and it would have a little comment off to the side being like, okay, so here's how I, built this and tweaked these rules. And it made my life as the editor so much easier
Nice.
that they knew it so well. But yeah, I think that's why it's so important to have a tight relationship. I mean, in this case, the editorial side and the game side were one person, which was me, which
Right.
was I think really useful for that line. And later on, we also had like Chris Carey helped run that. Nowadays they're still doing web fiction, even though the Pathfinder Tales line is sadly no more. Um, they're doing fiction on their website, and that's being run by Mark Moreland. And like, it's the same thing. People who are game developers and editors, it's just much easier to get it right than the way licensing normally happens, which is you have, fiction book company on one hand and, game company on the other hand, and they're trying to, both sides are trying to sort of work together. But if you aren't really steeped in the lore, I think it makes it so much harder.
Yeah, definitely. Whose idea was it to take and make Pathfinder Society Chronicles for the books?
Oh, that I'm sure that came out of the you mean the like the tie-ins and
Yeah,
stuff?
so like every time, like if you did the Pathfinder Society role playing at conventions
Right.
or whatever, and you had your characters, you could go on the website and you could download a chronicle if you owned the book.
I
And
can't remember if that came from Eric or Eric Mona, or if that came from the Pathfinder Society team. But you know, the truth of a game company is that for all the work that you spend trying to make something cool, you spend an equal amount of work trying to get anybody to pick it up. And so that was one of the ways that we tried to push people to like, there is a novel line, it's good, go check it out,
right.
so that started as a marketing thing.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that they kept it up because it was really fun to see every time a new book would come out. It's like, well, I wonder what the chronicle is going to be for these books.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
always the fun little thing with that. So what did, if you can say, I don't know if you can say or not, what
yeah.
did happen to the Pathfinder Tale series? How did that stop? Why did that stop? If you can
Oh,
talk about it.
yeah. I
If you
mean,
can't, I understand.
I can speak in general terms, but basically what happened is we had run the Pathfinder Tales line where we were publishing it ourselves for several years. I can't remember exactly how many, maybe four. And then we made a deal with Tor, which is a division of Macmillan Publishing,
Mhm.
to have them essentially be the publisher, but really it was more like a distribution and packaging kind of deal because we were still making the books, but then we would hand it off to them to sell them. And the whole reason for that was just that there was so much stuff that we were trying to do at Paizo. And as much as I loved the novels, the return on a novel was not nearly as good as the return on a game book, right?
Okay.
Because we could publish, a new hardcover and sell tens of thousands of copies, and have big margins versus, paperback novels. There's just not a whole lot of money to be made there.
Yeah.
And so we tried to do a partnership. We did that for a couple of years and it just didn't work out. Like the partnership between the companies was not as fruitful as anybody wanted. And then afterwards, there was just so much stuff going on that Paizo management was like, yeah, we don't want to do novels anymore. And it was crushing, frankly, because I had novels in the pipeline. Like I
Mhm.
had already bought novels from, including some of the biggest name authors that the line would have ever had. Folks that I won't say who it was, but there were some big folks that I considered major wins that we never got to put out.
Oh, that's a
Um,
bummer.
and maybe those books will rise again someday. But yeah, it was a very hard emotional thing. But I also understood like there's an opportunity cost with any, with any company, right? And so if you can make way more money doing game books, does it make sense to
Right.
spend staff on something that isn't giving you that return? And
Right.
especially, at the same time, also, that I was being the editor of, the novel line. Also, now I was the creative director of Starfinder.
Mhm.
So it's I was already massively overworked with that. So it's not like I could even argue that it was that it didn't make sense, right? But it was gutting.
Yeah, I can imagine. Put your heart and soul in something and then poof.
Yeah.
But
And
Starfinder, You had
Yeah.
Starfinder, which
No,
you
I mean, fortunately, I had something else to put my heart and soul
yeah,
into.
definitely something to have that space elevator bring you to.
Yeah. No, and it did. It really, and let me tell you, that one in Verisia was not the last space elevator that I stuck in. I think I finally got one in there somewhere. But maybe the particle accelerator I put in Belkson. But yeah, no, and then we got to do Starfinder, and that was an amazing amazing and grueling experience. Because we had from the day that Eric, and the managers pulled the lever and said we are going to do Starfinder, to the day it went to the printer, I think, was 1 year. Like we had 1 year to develop everything, which is, for folks who are not involved in this sort of stuff, that's real fast for a book that had to be like the requirements early on were just kind of laughable, because we said, okay, it's got to be as robust as Pathfinder. And remember, Pathfinder's already like a 576 page book, something like
Right.
that. It's got to be as robust as Pathfinder, but it's got to be easier to learn than Pathfinder. It also should have a bunch of setting material in there and like monsters and like what if and of course starship combat. And so like we had all these must-haves and paginated it out, and it was like, guys, this is a 1,000-page core
Right.
rule book. And Eric's saying, that's great, we want all of that, and it needs to be shorter than the Pathfinder core rule book.
Wow.
So
And in a month's time.
yeah, and I was very fortunate, when, to be honest, when Eric first said, I think the time to do it is now, we should do Starfinder, because everybody had been thinking about it for years. It had always been sort of an idea, wouldn't it be fun to do a science fantasy game? But it just never seemed like the thing to do. And then when Eric finally said go, the way I remember it, and I could be totally wrong, was that it was on sort of a Friday afternoon. And there were a lot of people saying, like, look, this would be super cool, but it can't be done. Like, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time to get it out on this schedule. And then, as I recall, I came in on Monday and like went into Eric's office and said, all right, I think this is doable. I think we can do it. Like, if you let me take this project, I will make it happen for you. But like, we got to start now. And he said, okay, here you go. And that was how I became creative director on Starfinder. And
Wow.
yeah, it was some of the most fun and also the most stress I had in my entire career there, because we had this massive assignment. And it was incredibly creatively rewarding, like getting to do that setting chapter, based on Distant Worlds, was a dream, and everybody, it was all hands on deck. There was sort of a core Starfinder team, a couple of folks that were working with me, but everybody in the company, even if they weren't on the Starfinder team, everybody was writing stuff for the book. Everybody was contributing. Everybody was doing design.
Did you guys
And it
have to
was,
did you guys have to source ideas like for what you do and don't want from other, space? Because obviously, Pathfinder is based off of D&D and that kind
oh,
of stuff. Did you end up sourcing off of like any like Star Trek, Star Wars RPGs, the
oh
10
yeah,
million different versions of Star Wars out there?
we totally, we're thinking about all of the different influences we had. Everybody was putting together lists of like, what do we want this to be able to do? Because one of the things about Pathfinder, people had sort of said at the time, and probably still say, that like one of the worst things you can do for a game system is for a setting is be generic, right? Everybody said if you try and go too wide, you'll lose focus and you'll lose your audience, which is why a lot of those old campaign settings are very narrowly
Mm-hmm.
themed. But for Pathfinder, we kind of wanted to be everything to everyone. And so we came up with that idea of doing, every nation will kind of be its own campaign setting, right?
Yeah.
So if you really love Ravenloft and, Gothic horror, well, try Ustalov,
Right.
that kind of thing. And that allowed us to do kind of everything in the same world. And so for Starfinder, we wanted to do the same thing. We said, we want you to be able to tell, we want you to be able to tell Star Wars and The Fifth Element, but also Alien. I want you to be able to do every type of science fantasy in this setting. And I think we pulled it off, right? Because we got a rule set that was robust enough, while being simpler. that people could sort of play all of these different types of science fantasy games. But yeah, we were very aware of everything that came before us, especially the idea of setting it in Pathfinder's future. I mean, it's hard to not think of how like Warhammer and Warhammer 40K kind of did the same thing, right? So yeah, we were very aware of those who went before, but also really trying to do
Right.
our own thing.
Definitely. Did there ever come up a time where a conversation was brought up about doing Starfinder novels?
Oh, I mean, Starfinder novels, everybody has always wanted to do Starfinder novels or Starfinder comics or anything like that. And in the beginning, they're just A, there wasn't the capacity, and B, the Pathfinder novel line had just shut down because it wasn't
Yep.
profitable enough.
That's what I
So
assume the answer is, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question.
yeah, that said, I think everybody like I think there are a lot of people who would dearly love to see that happen. And so, I've always got my fingers crossed that someday something will come back. And I know I just heard that Paizo is now doing sort of a official, unofficial fan fiction license thing.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember the name. It's like Pathfinder Unlimited or Starfinder Unlimited or something, where fans can write their own stories set in those settings and sell them. So I know they're just, oh Jesus, can we cut that? I don't know if that's been announced. I think
Okay.
that's been announced.
Let
I saw
me-
no, you know what? I think I saw people tweeting about it, so I'm sure it's been announced. This is if my phone starts blowing up where Eric Mona is like, Sutter, that was
Shame
confidential.
on you.
Wait, the irony being, like, it's been 4 years since I worked at Paizo.
Mhm.
I have zero inside information except for this one thing because somebody asked me about something. If I spilled the one thing that I know.
Well, you'll just have to get back to me and when we're done and let us know, and I'll just put a bleep over it so they know
Yeah.
there's something there, but they won't know what it is.
Yeah. Everybody who's in the chat, yeah. Actually, if anybody in the chat knows that this has already been announced, please let us know so that I'm not still sweating.
Well, speaking of Starfinder, explain to me the Starfinder Alexa game. Because it's a game, right? Is it a game?
Yeah. Hold on. Weirdly, as soon as I said that, like my Twitter popped up. Yeah, so the Starfinder Alexa game is it is a single person or single player RPG in audio format. So the Alexa team partnered with Paizo and wanted to do basically a role-playing video game that was entirely audio. So it's kind of halfway between a computer RPG and halfway between like an audio choose your own adventure.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, and so like it's fun because it's this thing where you can essentially play through a single player Starfinder adventure while you're cooking dinner or whatever. You just say and I'm sure I'm going to set some people off right now, but you say, Alexa, play Starfinder or play the Starfinder game, and it'll pop up with this whole high production value game. It's full cast, it's got sound design and everything. It's really quite slick, and they got great voice actors. I'm very proud they got both Laura Bailey and Nathan Fillion in there. So the idea that's like, oh my god, I'm writing dialogue for somebody who was on Firefly.
Right,
like that's a career goal right there. But yeah, it was great, and I was very fortunate that Paizo trusted me to be the lead writer on it. So I wrote pretty much the whole game, working with the design team over at Alexa, and it was really fun. And it's available. The first chapter is free, so literally, if you have an Alexa or if you have the app on your phone, you can just try it out right now.
Nice. Does that open? Are you hoping that opens the door for you to do more video game type content?
Well, it wasn't the first video game that I'd written. So there, okay. I think I got very lucky because there was a sort of perfect storm of they needed somebody who knew Starfinder really well, who had written video games before, and who didn't work at Paizo as a day job because they were all super crunched. And so they were like, who can do this, but has the ability to do this full time without quitting their job, and so I was available. But yeah, I had written, a little bit for the Kingmaker role playing game. I'd done some stuff for another an app game called Castle Creep. So I am far from a career video game writer, but I had done enough stuff that I wasn't a total babe in the woods.
Yeah.
But it was still, every video game project I've done has been different, and so it was fascinating to learn the coding language because originally I was just writing scripts, and then pretty soon it was like, it would be easier if I just learned the code you all are using. And so they taught me how to write in their, the markup that they'd made for the Alexa. And it was really fun. Like, as somebody who knows very little about coding, that's always seemed like the closest to actual wizardry. And so I was very pleased to get a chance to learn my little snippet of it. And the game, I think, turned out great.
Great. Well, hopefully I can get a chance to try it out with somebody that I know that might have an Alexa or two, because I don't have one.
Yeah. Well, so actually, I don't have one either. And they told me you can download the app just like on your smartphone and play it that way, like just the Alexa app.
They're gonna get a new business person from that.
Yeah.
One game.
It's free. As far as I think it's free. I could be wrong. Oh, well, but I think it's free.
Just have to try it and find out.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you plan on? Anything else you can talk about that you are working on coming up that you can?
Well,
I know you mentioned some things you can't, but
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I'm working on on the game side that I can't really talk about. But the main reason that I left Paizo, years ago, was because I wanted to focus more on fiction. And so I'm still doing creator-owned stuff. I don't have anything to announce there just yet, but trying to just write novels. I did recently sell a short story to the horror magazine Nightmare, so that'll be out in a couple of, I think, maybe in spring. Okay. Yeah, in the meantime, I've just been doing that. I've been teaching classes a lot, which is nice. If anybody's interested in getting into game writing, I got to go on the Writing Excuses podcast and do a masterclass series for them with Cassandra Kaw, who's another excellent game writer and a fiction author. And so that's, if you go to Writing Excuses, that came out a couple months ago, and it's a 8-part series on how to get into the game industry, how to do the job once you're there. And I feel like that's kind of the best distillation of knowledge I could give in 2 hours of here's drinking from the fire hose on how to make a game industry career go.
Nice. And you've been doing writing workshops at some cons here and there. Obviously, yeah. COVID happened and all that, but
yeah, no, I've been teaching at a bunch of different places, mostly online stuff, certainly in the last year. But even before that, I like teaching online stuff. So I'll usually do a couple classes a year for the Cat Rambo Academy, which is all online. And that'll be, I'll do world building or the business side of writing, or, just stuff about how to survive as a freelancer, or how to design a better fantasy pantheon, stuff like that. And that's always really fun. But I don't have so much of a schedule as just every so often I'll open up a class with one of them.
Now, the biggest question I have for you ever, do you still get time to role play?
Actually, during the pandemic, I have role played more than in the decade beforehand. It's actually, there are not a lot of upsides to the pandemic. I would venture to say there are almost none. But the one that there is, playing Pathfinder or Starfinder over Skype has been great. I've got a group where everybody's home and available on Tuesday nights because nothing's going on, And so I did some of the longest running campaigns that I've ever managed to keep together have been in the last 2 years. So
do you prefer GMing really or playing?
I prefer GMing, and I sort of didn't realize that about myself for many years. And then finally realized being a GM is hard. It's more work, but it's also more rewarding because you're playing the entire time. And I love that improvisational element. I'm a very low prep, high whimsy game master. I have flagrant disregard for the rules when I don't know, when I can't remember how something works, you know.
Yeah.
And I just really love that banter with players. And so yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Uh, you know, just to throw it back, I'm backtracking a bit here. I probably should have brought this up earlier. Did you have much of a hand in the card game, the Pathfinder adventure card game?
No, I did a little bit of editing on there, and I believe they put Salim from my novels.
They
And
did. They did.
yeah, I worked with them a little bit to add some novel-based content to that. But no, that was a whole nother division of the company, and actually licensed with an outside game company.
Yeah, Mike
Lone
Selinger
Shark.
was
Yeah, Lone
on
Shark.
here with us. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Mike.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the truth of the blessing and the curse of a game getting successful is you can no longer touch everything.
Right.
And that's one of those things that either will break you or really delight you. And I feel like learning how to, you know, I've seen people really get consumed by, they create something and then it starts to grow beyond them, and they just feel like star systems are slipping through their fingers, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But if you can just build a team of cool people who have good ideas and then sit back and let yourself be surprised and delighted, I think that's the best, you know. And actually, I something that I like about the Starfinder process when we were creating that, you know, I say that was the most grueling year, but I also think it was really nice that I had a team where I could just trust everybody on that team to make cool stuff, and we all kind of had to trust each other. And I think that lends itself to better design. You know, people, whenever I talk about creative direction, you know, I think the value of a creative director is in how little you can say no. Like the more you can say yes and, you know, get the best work out of your people, rather than trying to make everything your vision, I think the stronger the property is going to be. And also that means that when you do have to say, what if we did it like this? People are a lot less likely to be hurt by it if you approved their other ideas, which were actually cool, you know? So I think being a good manager often means relinquishing control.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time with us today. It's been really awesome. We've got to cover. I was worried early when we came on. I mentioned, I was like, there's so much stuff to talk about. I don't know if we'll get to it all. And you know what? I think we got to pretty much all of it. So that's awesome.
Good.
It's awesome. And it was in a good way. Of course, we had the one little flip flop with somebody with the sound, which we fixed, by the way. I'm pretty sure it got fixed. Found out where that was at. You are on Twitter at James L Sutter.
Yes.
Are you on Facebook publicly? You have a page?
You know, I really stopped using Facebook. So like I'm there, but the description says I never use Facebook. I always feel bad because people will send me messages and I don't see it until a year later because I literally log in once a year to check.
Wow.
Twitter is really where I hang out, or my website at jameslsutter.com. You can find my contact info there. But in general, Twitter is where I'm spending way too much time.
Yeah, and you have all of your other interviews, your writing excuses, everything on that is listed on one nice little page location. It's a really nice website, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Easy to get around to where you want to go. If you want to find something, it's like I go here and then I go here and then I'm there.
That's good to know, because I definitely, like, we built that a long time ago. And you know, I am not a web dev at all, and so I've been fortunate enough to have some friends help me, you know, fix it up. But
awesome. Well, it's been great having you with us. I very much appreciate it. To everybody listening, thank you for listening to Epic Realms. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast. Have a great night, everyone, and thank you.